He didn't look at me the way he used to. That gaze I once felt wrapped around me like a quiet embrace, gentle. Sure, his way of saying, "I see you," was gone. Now, when he glanced in my direction, it was with the vacant eyes of someone scanning a grocery shelf, searching for something they no longer remembered why they needed. Or maybe he wasn't looking for anything at all. It was Thursday. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and unspoken things. Outside, autumn had started to settle over Charleston, South Carolina, with its sleepy golden trees and chilled air that slipped through our old window frames. Inside, Josh sat at the table with the morning paper outdated, unread his coffee untouched. I stood at the sink, rinsing a spoon longer than I needed to, pretending not to watch him not watch me. Our kids, Ella and Timmy, were still upstairs getting ready for school. I could hear their usual chatter-muffled laughter, footsteps on hardwood, the kind of life that should have filled a house with warmth. But in the kitchen, it was just him and me. And silence. I broke it, of course. I always did. "There's a parent-teacher meeting next Thursday," I said, placing a clean spoon on the drying rack. "You think you can get off work early?" Josh nodded. No eye contact. No words. "Josh?" He glanced up, blinked, then back down to the unread newspaper. "I'll try," he said flatly. I nodded back. We both returned to our positions, me at the sink, him at the table, as if we were co-workers sharing a break room. Neither of us had wanted to enter, as if we were strangers. I'd like to say it crept up on us slowly, this distance. But the truth is, it arrived like fog. Unnoticed at first, then suddenly everywhere. I had always thought we talked about bills, about the kids, about the house. But one day, I realized I hadn't heard my name from his lips in weeks. He'd speak to Ella, to Timmy, to clients, over the phone. But me? I'd become a task list. A notification. A quiet presence to be acknowledged, never embraced. At work that afternoon, I found myself eating lunch beside Janie, one of the veteran teachers. She was in her early 50s, sharp as a tack, recently divorced. I asked her, casually, how it had all started, how you go from "I do" to "I'm done." She looked at me with a sort of sad recognition. "It doesn't start with a fight," she said. "It starts with silence. A silence that feels safer than honesty." That stayed with me, haunted me. I went home and Googled silent resentment, article after article. Psychology blogs, anonymous confessions. A recurring theme. When communication dies, relationships don't explode, they erode. Slowly, quietly. That night, I watched Josh as he fixed the garage light. He didn't ask for help. He didn't look up when I brought him a glass of water. He mumbled a thanks, but it felt like a reflex, not a connection. I realized I'd been talking at him, not with him. At dinner, I tried a different approach. I asked him how his project was going. He shrugged. Fine. Ella started telling a story from school. Josh smiled at her, not at me. I excused myself, took my cold plate into the kitchen, and sat in the dark for a while. The next night, he didn't come to dinner at all, said he wasn't hungry, stayed in the garage. I set the table anyway, 3 plates. The 4th remained empty. That was the night it cracked. Ella asked if Dad was mad. Timmy just stared at his plate. I made up some excuse he had a lot on his mind, deadlines, but my voice trembled. And then, without meaning to, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for my son to look up and whisper, "Mom, does Dad not love you anymore?" My breath caught. I wanted to tell him no, that wasn't true. That of course his father loved me. But the words, like so many things in our marriage, felt unsure. That night, after tucking them in, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at the faucet. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty. Like someone had pressed pause on a life I used to belong to. And then I made a decision, not out of spite or surrender, but out of curiosity. What would happen if I just stopped talking? Not completely, not cold, but stopped instructing, correcting, reminding, suggesting. What if I allowed silence the passive kind, but intentional, observant silence to take the place of my constant trying? It wasn't about punishing him. It was about listening to what I had never let myself hear. At midnight, I searched online for anything. I found a course titled Intimacy Skills for Women. I hovered over the sign-up button. My pride resisted, but something deeper, something desperate clicked. Enroll. A confirmation email came instantly. Inside, a welcome message. Start with respect. Day 1, no criticism. I stared at that sentence. It seemed so simple, and yet radical. No criticism. What would that even sound like in my house? The next morning, I made coffee and placed a cup in front of Josh. I didn't comment on the dishes he hadn't washed, didn't remind him about trash day, just, "Here's your coffee," and a quiet smile. He looked surprised, like I'd done something unusual. Maybe I had. He sipped, looked at me, then out the window. Neither of us said another word. But that silence, it didn't feel like distance. It felt different. Not warm yet, but not cold either. Like the first breath of fall after a long, hot summer. As I sat back down, I noticed my own coffee had gone cold. Again. I'd been making that same cup every morning, and letting it go untouched while I scrolled through stress and tried to fix a marriage with words. But that morning, I drank it. Slowly. And for once, it tasted real. Later that evening, I opened an old photo album. My mother's handwriting was scrawled on the inside cover. She had always been the one in control of everything. The house, the meals, the schedule, my father's every move. And yet, I remember her sitting at that same kitchen table, across from a man who rarely spoke. She filled the space with words. He filled it with silence. They lived like that parallel lines that never touched again after the early years. She died in that same house, alone though she was married. I don't want that for me, or Josh, or our kids. So I wrote something in the margin of my workbook from the intimacy course. I'm not choosing silence as a wall. I'm choosing it as an invitation. I don't know what this journey will look like yet, but I know the way we've been living isn't working, and maybe the beginning of change isn't saying more. Maybe it's learning how to stop and listen. I used to believe that if I didn't speak my mind, something in me would wither. That silence would make me invisible, irrelevant, erased. But that day, the only words I spoke to Josh were, "Thank you." And somehow, they felt more powerful than anything I'd shouted, begged, or explained in months. It began, like most days, in the cluttered corner of my second-grade classroom. I was stapling together a set of reading packets when Janie appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of lukewarm teacher's lounge coffee like offerings to the gods of burnt caffeine and exhausted women. She handed me one and said nothing. That was Janie's superpower. She knew how to hold space without filling it. She was divorced, but not bitter. Real, but not hardened. I used to think her quietness meant resignation. I now realized it meant she had learned things I hadn't yet dared to learn. I told her without saying much about the choice I had made, that I was trying not to criticize Josh, that I was observing instead of speaking. Her brow lifted, just slightly. "That's harder than people think," she said. I nodded. "It's like trying not to breathe." Janie smiled. "Then maybe it's time to learn to breathe differently." Back at home, the air was still. Timmy was drawing dinosaurs in the living room, and Ella was upstairs FaceTiming her best friend. Josh wasn't home yet. I set a pot of water on the stove for pasta, the simple kind everyone would eat without complaint. As it boiled, I opened my notebook, the little brown leather one I'd bought years ago, thinking I'd journal my dreams. Now, it had become my mirror. I flipped to a fresh page and titled it in bold, "Day 1, no criticism." At 6:22, I heard the garage door rattle open. I felt the usual flicker anticipation, tension, run through me. I'd learned to read the sounds of his day before I even saw his face. How hard his boots hit the floor, how quickly the door shut behind him. Tonight, they were neutral, neither heavy nor light. "Hey," he said as he came into the kitchen. "Smells good." I looked up, smiled. Dinner will be ready soon. That was it. I didn't tell him the trash hadn't been taken out. Didn't ask if he'd followed up with the HVAC guy. I didn't say a word about the damp towel I'd found this morning on the hallway floor. I just stirred the pasta. Josh stood there for a moment. I saw him notice the table already set. His brow furrowed slightly, as if trying to place what felt different. He went to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat at the island. I felt his eyes on me but didn't turn around. "How was work?" I asked without turning. "Fine," he said. "Yours?" I paused. That was the first time he'd asked me that in weeks? Months? "It was okay," I replied softly. "Tiring. But okay." He nodded, sipping his drink. No more words, but it felt like a thread. After dinner, I was rinsing dishes when I heard the clink of tools from under the sink. Josh had been meaning to fix the faucet for weeks now. It had developed a subtle drip, nothing dramatic, but constant enough to annoy. He was finally tackling it. He crouched down, flashlight in one hand, wrench in the other. I watched for a moment from the doorway. My instinct surged. Offer the manual, hand him the right-sized washer, ask if he wanted help, remind him to turn off the water. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Instead, I sat on the floor nearby. Not in the way, just present. Josh noticed. He paused. "You're not going to tell me how to do this?" he asked, half teasing, half testing. I smiled faintly. "Nope." He looked back at the pipes. "Huh." 15 minutes later, the drip stopped. When he stood up, stretching his back, he looked at me for a moment. Really looked. "Thanks for letting me figure it out," he said. "It's been a long time since you didn't jump in." I blinked. That wasn't sarcasm. That was appreciation. "You're welcome," I said, and meant it. Later, in bed, we lay side by side. The space between us wasn't smaller, not yet, but it didn't feel like a chasm. It felt like a waiting field, quiet, open, with the possibility of something planting itself in the soil. I opened my notebook again, pulled the covers up to my chest, and wrote. He noticed. He thanked me. He saw me. Below it, I scribbled, "I didn't have to speak to be heard." At 9:53, my phone buzzed. A notification from the intimacy course. I opened it. Tomorrow's skill. Receptivity. The art of receiving without resistance. I stared at those words for a long time. Receiving. Not earning. Not explaining. Just letting it in. I remembered a time, early in our marriage, when Josh would bring home little things for me. A box of my favorite tea. A novel he thought I'd like. One time, a scarf in a color I never would have picked for myself, but it brought out my eyes, he'd said. I used to brush those gifts off. Tell him not to spend money. That he didn't have to. That I didn't need them. Eventually, he stopped. Was that what the course meant? I closed my eyes and let the thought settle. The next morning, I found Josh in the kitchen. He was making pancakes for the kids. Timmy was at the table, humming. Ella was scrolling on her phone, but she smiled when she saw the stack of steaming golden circles. I stood in the doorway for a beat longer than necessary. Josh noticed me. "Want one?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, thank you." I didn't offer to take over the pan. Didn't say, "I'll clean up after." I just sat, received the plate he handed me, and smiled. It felt awkward, but it also felt like breath. At work during lunch, I told Janie what had happened. About the faucet, the pancakes. She grinned. Men notice more than they let on, especially when you stop trying to get them to notice. I laughed. That's the irony, right? She nodded. We're taught to connect through words, but sometimes connection grows in the silence between them. That night, I read over my notebook again. I'd filled 3 pages with things I hadn't said, and things he had. I realized something. All this time, I'd thought my words were bridges. Turns out, they were walls. Not because they were unkind, but because they didn't leave space for him to show up differently. I closed my eyes and saw my mother again, her kitchen, her control, her loneliness. She'd never let my father fail. and so he never tried. She had answers to questions he hadn't yet asked, and it made him disappear, piece by piece. I didn't want that for Josh. Or for me. That night, as I lay beside him, I whispered one more thing just before sleep stole me away. I liked the pancakes. He didn't respond right away, but a minute later, I felt his hand brush against mine. Not by accident, not asleep. And that was enough. Not perfect, but enough to try again tomorrow. He turned toward me, confused. For making you feel like it wasn't safe, I said. For turning your voice into something that only came out when it had to. For repeating what you already survived. Josh didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. He set his wine glass down on the porch rail, reached over, and took my hand. His palm was rough, warm, familiar. You're changing, he said softly. I see it, and I'm changing too. I held his hand tighter. The porch creaked again, as if sighing in relief. We sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to, just breathing in a shared space we hadn't visited in years. Eventually, I leaned back and looked up at the stars. There weren't many we lived too close to town, but the ones that showed up were stubborn, brilliant. I used to think silence was punishment, I said. Josh nodded. I know. But maybe, I continued, it's just room for truth to breathe. He smiled, not fully but enough. Later that night, after we went inside and locked up the house, I opened my notebook again, the same brown leather one. Page after page had started to fill observations, moments, things left unsaid and what grew in their place. Tonight I wrote, silence isn't avoidance. Sometimes it's the only place honesty feels safe enough to speak. Below that, I drew a small sketch, 2 chairs, side by side, slightly tilted toward one another. They weren't fancy. They didn't match. But they were still standing. Still holding weight. I thought of my own father then. He had loved my mother deeply. Everyone knew it, but he never said much. He worked long hours, fixed things around the house. Saturday, quietly at dinner, while my mom filled the air with updates, instructions, opinions. When he died, we found a box in the attic filled with old letters he had never sent. To her, to me, to no one. He had loved. Fiercely. He just didn't know how to say it while he was still breathing. And I realized something else. Josh had inherited that silence. And I had inherited my mother's noise. We'd both been surviving the only way we knew. But now, maybe we were both learning a new language. One built not on perfection, or performance, or control, but on pause and permission. That night, as Josh turned off the lamp beside our bed, he leaned over and kissed the top of my head. No words. None needed. Just warmth. Just presence. Just 2 people, finally choosing to listen. He looked at me like he was falling in love for the first time. Not with surprise, but with the kind of slow recognition that says, I see you again and I missed you. It happened beneath the wide blue sky of Folly Beach on a Saturday that smelled like sea salt and sunscreen, with the kind of sun that warms your skin without burning it. We had packed the cooler that morning with juice boxes, watermelon slices, sandwiches wrapped in foil, and a bottle of rosé that Josh tossed in at the last second, saying with a smirk, why not? The kids had been begging for a beach day for weeks. Between school events and Josh's projects, it never quite happened. But that morning, without much fuss, he said, let's go. No sarcasm. No sigh. Just that. Ella wore her favorite sun hat. Timmy had brought his kite, the red one with the dragon. I brought nothing but my quiet resolve and that familiar brown notebook tucked into my tote, still half full of words I hadn't said. At the park, we found a grassy spot with just enough shade from a tired palm tree. The beach stretched ahead, glistening like a promise. Josh spread out the blanket while I handed out sandwiches. The kids were off in second chasing seagulls, collecting shells, making up games. Josh laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite chuckle I'd grown used to, but something open, unguarded. He jogged after Timmy with a ridiculous dad run, arms flailing, mock roaring. Ella squealed as he lifted her off the ground and spun her. I watched them, my chest full of something too wide for a single name piece, maybe. Or awe. I felt someone tap my shoulder. Claire? I turned. Julie Monroe. We hadn't seen each other in years. We'd gone to college together, lost touch, then bumped into each other a few times at PTA meetings before life sent us down different corridors. She wore oversized sunglasses and held an iced coffee, the condensation dripping down her wrist. Her hair was longer, but her curiosity hadn't changed. Wow, she said, glancing from Josh back to me. You guys look different, happier. I smiled, cautious. We've had a good week. Julie tilted her head. What changed? I hesitated, then shrugged. I stopped talking so much. She laughed, thinking it was a joke, but I didn't laugh with her. I'm serious, I said. I tried this thing 1 week without criticism. No reminding, no correcting, no managing. Just listening, observing. Julie raised an eyebrow. That actually worked? It didn't fix everything, I said. But it changed the direction. She stared at me, quiet for a moment. You always were the one who had the answers. Turns out, I said softly, I was asking the wrong questions. We sat together for a few minutes before she wandered off to find her family. I stayed, legs crossed, toes digging into the cool edge of the blanket. I watched Josh help Ella build a lopsided sandcastle. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't distracted. He was present. When they came back, sun-kissed and sandy, he handed me a bottle of water and sat beside me. Not just near me, beside me. Our shoulders touched. I felt his warmth through the thin fabric of my shirt. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. Then, out of nowhere, he placed his hand gently on the small of my back. Just a simple press. But it was electric. It was familiar and new at the same time. And then he looked at me. That look, it wasn't for show. It wasn't performance. It was real. And I smiled, not the kind you force, but the kind that slips out because your body remembers joy before your brain does. The kids noticed immediately. Ew, Timmy shouted, laughing and pointing. Dad's flirting with Mom. Ella giggled. Are you guys in love again? Josh laughed, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when he was nervous. I blushed, but didn't pull away. Not this time. Maybe we never stopped, I said. Maybe we just forgot how to show it. They rolled their eyes and ran off again, but I caught Ella glancing back, her smile softer than before. Later, while they played and Josh cleaned off the picnic area, I sat with my notebook open, scribbling under the line I'd drawn the night before. My handwriting was messier, now freer. He touched me first. Not by accident, not out of obligation. He just wanted to. I paused, chewing on the end of the pen, then wrote again. Love isn't always something you speak. Sometimes, it's something you remember how to feel when the noise is gone. I closed the notebook and lay back on the blanket, shielding my eyes from the sun with one arm. It struck me then, how much effort I'd spent trying to keep things together. All the years I'd believed that being a good wife meant saying the right thing at the right time, in the right tone. That if I just explained one more time, nudged him a little harder, reminded him a little louder, he'd finally get it. But maybe he already had it. Maybe he just needed space to offer it in his own way. And maybe love wasn't about offering solutions. Maybe it was about choosing silence long enough for someone else to hear their own voice again. On the way home, the kids dozed off in the back seat, their cheeks flushed with sun and play. Josh reached over and rested his hand on my thigh. No words, just warmth, just being. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there for a second, hand still on me. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not giving up. I looked at him. Thank you for coming back. That night, after the kids were tucked in, and the last grains of sand were rinsed from between our toes, I sat at my desk and began writing a letter. Not to Josh. Not to the kids. To me. To the version of me from 6 months ago who stood at the sink with her hands in soapy water and her heart in pieces. Dear Claire, you think you have to do it all. Say it all. Hold it all. But what you really need is to let go. Just a little. Enough to leave space for something new. You're not losing control, you're creating room for partnership. Trust the quiet. It's not your enemy. It's the invitation you've been waiting for. I folded the letter and slipped it into the back pocket of my notebook. Then I picked up my phone. Let's take a picture, I told Josh, who was brushing his teeth. He grinned with foam in the corners of his mouth. Right now? Yeah, this moment, just us. He rinsed, walked over, wrapped one arm around me, and held out the phone. We didn't pose. We didn't tilt our heads or fix our hair. We just smiled. For real. Not because we had to, but because we finally could. The night I stopped speaking was the night my marriage began again. Not in fireworks or some sweeping Hollywood kiss. Not in some perfect apology or magical realization. It began with stillness. It was nearly midnight when I finally hit record. The kids were asleep. The dishwasher had long finished its soft hum, and Josh was in the bedroom reading, unaware that I had tiptoed into the office. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the microphone of those podcast starter kits I'd bought months ago but never unboxed, still convinced I had nothing worth sharing. But that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not courage exactly, just honesty. A deep, aching need to tell the truth. Not for attention, but for connection. The audio program blinked, then glowed red. I stared at the blinking light for what felt like forever before I said anything at all. Hi, I whispered. My name is Claire. I'm not a therapist or an expert. I'm just a wife who nearly lost her marriage while trying to hold it together. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into the walls. I thought if I could say the right things, ask the right questions, fix the right problem, she'd come back to me. But what I didn't realize was that my words had become a shield. A wall, really. One I built with every well-meaning suggestion, every correction, every reminder that he wasn't doing things the way I would. I glanced down at the notebook open beside Meath brown leather one with dog-eared pages and ink-smudged confessions. My voice shook a little, but I kept going. I don't know when we stopped being us. I just know that one day I looked across the table and saw a man who didn't look at me anymore. And I saw myself a woman so busy trying to manage the relationship that she forgot how to feel it. My throat tightened, but I leaned into the pause. I tried something simple. A week without criticism. No corrections, no coaching, no nudges disguised as kindness, just silence and observation. I paused, waiting for judgment that wasn't coming. It was just me, the blinking red light, and whatever woman might hear this someday in her kitchen, staring at her own tired husband and wondering where they'd both gone. I thought it would break us, but it didn't. It broke something else. The illusion that I had to control everything in order to be loved. I wiped my eyes. I want to read something, I said, reaching for the slip of paper I'd been keeping like a lifeline. It was a note, a real one, handwritten, folded in the pocket of my coat. Josh had left it there after a morning walk we took the week before. He hadn't said anything about it, just slipped it in. I unfolded it and read aloud. I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you chose me again, even when I didn't know how to ask you to. That was the moment the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, grateful ones. I let them fall. I'm not telling this story because I have the answers, I said. I'm telling it because I lived the question, what happens when I stop speaking long enough to really listen to the love that's still there, waiting to breathe again? I sat in the quiet for a long moment before stopping the recording. No outro music, no polished ending, just me, raw and open. I hit save, titled the file, Claire, First Story, MP3. I didn't expect anything to come of it. But the next morning an email waited in my inbox. No subject line, just a name I didn't recognize. Hi Claire, I don't know you but I found your podcast through a random forum. I listened to it last night, I cried. I tried it this morning. It's day 2. And tonight, my husband looked at me and said, You remind me of the woman I used to be in love with. I didn't say anything back. I just smiled. Thank you for giving me permission to be quiet long enough to hear him. I read it again, then again, And again. I smiled, not out of pride but because I knew without question that something bigger was moving through me, that the stillness I'd once feared had become a doorway. And I wasn't just walking through it anymore. I was holding it open for others. Later that week, I filled out an application, not for a new job but for a new chapter, a coaching certification in intimacy skills, the same program that had saved my marriage. I hesitated on the question that asked, "Why do you want to do this?" I typed, "Because silence changed my life, and I think it might save someone else's too." I didn't tell Josh right away, not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to do it for me. For every version of me who had stood in the kitchen with aching silence, wondering if she was the only one. That night, I found him outside, sitting in one of the porch chairs. No book, no phone, just him, the stars, and the gentle creak of wood. I sat beside him. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." He reached for my hand, held it. We didn't talk much after that. But I didn't need him to. Because I had learned final that love doesn't always speak in sentences. Sometimes it's in the pause between words. The space where healing lives. The quiet room where grace shows up uninvited. And for the first time in a very long time, I let it in.